You gotta help me. He could be anywhere. He's always watching, always judging, pushing me to finish the New Year's special. Who on earth thinks that one content creator could finish all of this? Today, I'm going to finish my ranking of every single ancestry for Pathfinder 2nd Edition on today's episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Happy New Year's, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I am the local disaster tour guide. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. And welcome to my New Year's special, where we're taking a look at all of the ancestry options in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, this is a 3-part, not 2-part, as I originally hoped, video series where I am breaking down my thoughts on every single versatile heritage and ancestry in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Well, in this series, I am taking a look at every single option that Paizo presents and ranking it according to 4 different categories. Mechanics Part 1, Base Abilities and Heritage Options. Mechanics Part 2, Ancestry Feats. Lore and Story. And finally, the Wildcard category, ranking each ancestry's personality, artwork, and most importantly, level of surprise, aka, did Paizo offer anything that I didn't see coming? Additionally, this series is not just looking at every ancestry that Paizo offers, but also at the Undead PC archetypes from Book of the Dead, and every single ancestry option from the Battlezoo line of products. That's right, this series is also considering Battlezoo Ancestry Dungeons, Battlezoo Ancestries Dragons, all of the Battlezoo ancestries from Jewel of the Indigo Isles, and thank you to Stephen Glicker. As part of today's video, we will also get a sneak peek at the upcoming Battlezoo Ancestry Slimes, which is going to be part of this ranking. Now, if you want a more detailed breakdown on how each category and ranking is used, or if you just want to review all of the versatile heritages and all of the ancestries we have already covered, there will be links to parts 1 and 2 of this series, both up here somewhere and down in the video description. One last thing before we dive into this, videos like this take a ton of work, so anything you can do to support this channel is deeply, deeply appreciated. I'm not joking when I say that ultimately I am going to be editing through about 7 hours of raw footage to get a final presentable product for you. So therefore, if you have enjoyed this New Year's series, if you enjoyed this video, please, please, please remember to do all the YouTube stuff. Give the video a like, share it, subscribe to the channel. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. And as always, the best thing you can do for this channel, jump down to the comment section. Share your thoughts, your observations, your ideas. This video is full of my opinions, but I want to hear what you think as well. So let me know what I missed, let me know where you agree, and leave your thoughts about how you think the ancestries that appear in this video should have been ranked. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's get to the last video in this series and rank the top 25 picks for ancestries in Pathfinder 2e. Here we go. Okay, so now we're on the top half of the list of ancestry choices in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. There was certainly a lot of respectable content in the back half of the list. Numbers 50 through 26, there were certainly a lot of things I enjoyed, a lot of things that could make for appealing characters in Pathfinder 2e, but we're on the top half of the list. We need to look at some of the best options that Paizo and Battlezoo have to offer for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, which means we need to start off the top half of this list by asking, what if we made vegetarianism into a moral crisis? Welcome to number 25 on my Ancestries list, the Ghoran from Lost Omen's Impossible Lands. So, the Ghoran is a plant race that you can play in Pathfinder 2nd Edition that literally started off as an emergency food supply. The nation of Nex was desperate for food, and they turned to the powerful druid Gorus, who set out to design a tough and prolific food source that could grow in any environment, even one that had been shattered by the terrible wars with the nation of Geb. These resilient plants soon proved a little more difficult than Gorus originally intended. They could move to ideal locations, but they soon showed the ability to avoid harvest, and then even to avoid detection. It wasn't long before hunting these seeds became a desperate necessity, and not long after that, the nation of Nex became aware that Gorus' seeds had in fact become their own sentient life form. That's right, Ghoran accidentally created his own race of plant people. They are plant people who form around magical Gorus seeds, and when one Ghoran dies, that seed can be planted in the ground and spring up in the form of a new creature. This effectively allows the Ghorans to reincarnate from one version of themselves to the next. Kind of like a botanical android if you want to compare it to some of the earlier items on this list. Ghorans are photosynthetic creatures, meaning that they can feed themselves just by basking in the sun, and they come with a nice array of plant-oriented powers that can allow for some very fun character concepts. Now, unfortunately, when the druid Gorus passed away, he took the knowledge of how to create new Ghorans with him, meaning that, functionally, if one Ghoran dies without the seed being replanted, that individual is permanently lost from this ancestry. Can such magic ever be rediscovered? Paizo hasn't answered that question yet, but it places the Ghorans in an interesting and dangerous spot. They have become citizens of Nex and are no longer hunted for food, but there is a very real danger to their future if one of them should drop. Narratively, I think the Ghorans are a ton of fun, though, to be honest, it does feel like their story has stalled out over the long term. Their introduction to Golarion is great, and some of the long-term threats to the Ghoran people are also pretty interesting, but it seems like Paizo hasn't done much more with their story, leaving us ultimately with an interesting, if somewhat generic plant person that I wish Paizo would allow to advance a little bit further. I do have a complaint before I leave the Ghoran, though. In Pathfinder 1st Edition, the Ghoran actually came with a flaw called Delicious, representing their original creation as food for the nation of Nex. I know there's no mechanical reason to have that there, but I miss it so much. It was so unique, and I wish Paizo had kept it in 2E. I mean, they could have used it as an excuse to buff the Ghoran a little bit more. Anyways, number 25, and kicking off the top half of our list, the Ghoran. Coming in at number 24 on this list is the Azarketi, also commonly referred to as the Gillmen. This is a humanoid ancestry descended from the survivors of the continent of Azlant. When the Algolthu sunk the Azlanti Empire into the ocean, that nation was ultimately destroyed, but there were some survivors. Different groups of people went different ways, but one group of people were rescued, shall we say, by the Algolthu. These ancient Azlanti were turned into the ancestry now referred to as the Azarketi, or more commonly referred to as the Gillmen. Essentially an amphibious offshoot of humans who need water in order to survive. Yes, that's right, this is another ancestry that comes with the hydration flaw, requiring them not to travel too far away from the water, lest they run the risk of passing away. Being honest, this is an ancestry that initially didn't have a good impression for me, and I thought they would be lower on this list. Part of that may be because some of the publication problems that Paizo had last year, it kind of delayed the release of the Azarketi as a playable ancestry, and probably tainted their impression with me a little bit. I do know when they first dropped, I wasn't that interested, but diving into them, didn't even intend that pun, I found the actual Azarketi ancestry for 2E to be pretty engaging. They have some absolutely fantastic and powerful heritages. A good example is the benthic heritage, which gives them resistance to cold damage and resistance to the crushing depth of the ocean. And they have some really interesting Ancestry feats. Like, one of my favorites is the level 17 Ancestry feat, Underwater Volcano. Yeah, I know there's not going to be a lot of situations where I get to use an underwater volcano, but if the situation comes up, I would love to. Okay, so it's fair to say the Azarketi, like other amphibious ancestries, are a little bit niche in their use, but one of the things I find interesting about the Azarketi is they begin play speaking Algolthu and have access to the Aslanti language. That's pretty cool for some scholarly characters. Also, narratively speaking, you have a tension between Azarketi who continue to serve the Algolthu and Azarketi who are fighting for freedom from the Algolthu, with the third enjoyable option, Azarketi who don't realize who they serve. All said, the Azarketi make for a fantastic number 24 on my list. But the time has come for number 23 on my list, and shout out to Stephen Glicker and the fantastic work that he does on the Battlezoo line of products. Today we get to take a sneak peek at the new Battlezoo Ancestry Slimes. This ancestry will allow you to play a slime that has somehow elevated itself above the mindless state that most oozes occupy and gain sentience in some fashion. Now, these sentient slimes are, almost by definition, a solitary type of creature. The kind of circumstances that allow for an ooze to grow a nucleus and gain awareness are obviously quite rare. Most slime characters are not going to have deep ties to any particular setting, but I also like that for the slimes because it makes them relatively easy to drop into any setting. By definition, this is the kind of ancestry that's going to be rare no matter where you're playing, but is going to fit relatively the same no matter where they might pop up. These intelligent slimes have the ability to control their form and often take some sort of humanoid shape to help them interact with the world around them, though their form control is always a bit iffy at best, so rather than true arms and hands, they manipulate the world with a pair of oozy pseudopods. Also, one of the things I really like about slimes as a playable ancestry is their base mechanic that applies to all slimes is a natural resistance to precision damage. The slime ancestry develops a nucleus that allows them to function as a sentient creature, so they do have some weak points in their anatomy, but they still maintain a lot of that just hard to hurt that most oozes have. As a result, they naturally resist precision damage of any sort, and that's a fun ability you don't get to see on a lot of characters, so I think it's a nice addition here. Your typical slime player is going to be slower than most other ancestries, but they are also going to have an innate motion sensibility, reflecting a heritage that harkens back to their original ooze state. Narratively speaking, the heritages for the slime are not super engaging. They're mostly just a description of how the slime has evolved, if you will. You get 5 options: agile, amphibious, tiny, twilight, and fractal. Now the first 4 are fairly simple. Agile allows your slime to be a little bit faster, bringing your speed up to 25 feet, on par with the typical ancestry. Amphibious is exactly what you think it is. You can breathe air and water, allows you to operate in aquatic environments a little better. Tiny allows you to play a tiny-sized slime, and also gives you training in stealth. And then the Twilight slime is going to give you access to low-light vision. However, the final heritage, and probably the most narratively interesting, is the Fractal slime. You see, ooze creatures reproduce by splitting into 2 new creatures. Well, sentient slimes are the same. They reproduce by splitting apart. Now, normally, the intelligence of one slime does not carry over to the next, but sometimes some sentient slimes gain the ability to pass some of their potential for conscious thought onto the new slime that they create, functionally creating a weird parent-child relationship. A fractal slime is a slime that came from just such a split and starts the game with an extra trained skill that they inherited from their parent slime. The narrative impact of a lot of this is quite humorous, and I think the authors at Battlezoo were having a little fun when they came up with all of this. Now, while the heritages for the slime ancestry are relatively plain, as I said in the previous video in this series, the writers at Battlezoo do some fantastic work on ancestry feats, and the slime ancestry feats, I think, are a good reflection of this. You get some deception-oriented feats if you want to try to hide what kind of character you're playing, but I think a lot of the feats that players are going to go for will give you access to ooze-like abilities, such as Engulf and Split, including one ancestry feat where you can split into two versions of yourself, using one as a decoy to protect yourself from attacks. And a remarkable number of slime ancestry feats have either energy attacks or energy defense of some kind, representing a lot of the inherent magic that tends to animate oozes. Honestly, there's a lot of fun stuff here, and it's the kind of abilities you don't normally see on a player character, so I think that the slime ancestry is going to get a lot of interest just because of the unique options that it presents. One last thing that I want to say before leaving the slimes is a concept that Battlezoo presents called melded slimes, which represents an ooze that ate a creature and absorbed that creature's personality and is now imitating that creature. This is such a crazy player character concept, but I've got to try it at some point. So to Stephen Glicker, Mark Seifter, this content is amazing. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to sneak peek Battlezoo Ancestry Slimes. I'm looking forward to the other content you do this year. And I am glad to award the Slime Ancestry number 23 on this list. Coming in at number 22, we have another ancestry that originally I suspected would be lower on this list, but when I saw some of the stuff that Paizo has been doing with it, I was kind of impressed and it worked its way up. I guess you could say it flew to new heights. That's right, number 22 on this list is the Strix ancestry, also known as the Itarii. These are winged humanoids that live in a small region called the Devil's Perch in Cheliax. They are extremely isolationist and very distrustful of others, and have a long history of conflict with both Cheliax and Taldor before that. Their story is a little shrouded in mystery. Their language seems to draw from Aslanti with a mixture of Infernal, and there are rumors that the ancestry was spotted as far back as during the time of the Jiska Imperium, with Strix legend stating that they were carried to the Devil's Perch by a strange green storm. Little more is known. If you saw yesterday's video, you may see a lot of the check marks of ancestries that normally bother me, and I will admit, some of those things are there. The Strix, as written, particularly in Pathfinder 1st Edition, were really an ancestry that didn't feel usable the way they were presented. They were too distrustful, they were too isolationist to ever really become involved with the wider world. Now, they maintain many of those qualities, but in 2nd edition, Paizo has taken the time to add some additional elements that make a Strix adventure a little more probable. One is the rumor of Strix witches that go out into the world as a sort of protector of the Strix community, and the other is a unique role within Strix communities called the Rokoa, which serves as a leader for the Strix community, and the possibility of Strix characters either serving as witches or training to be Rokoa that go out into the world are certainly concepts that could be used for player characters. I appreciate Paizo taking the time to expand upon the Strix in a way that allows you to potentially use these ancestries and make them feel like they are a part of the world and you're not just playing against type. The 1st edition version was very restrictive, and opening this ancestry up I think is a good thing. Now, there are some problems here. First off, the Strix are one of the ancestries that have no ability flaws, and generally speaking that's just not something I like in Pathfinder 2e, same is true here. And another problem with the Strix is the fact that they don't have any 17th level ancestry feats, and that is something that really bothers me. If you can take ancestry feats up until level 17, you should have options up until that point. Now, like many other ancestries in this game, the region that Strix are associated with hasn't received serious publication yet, which tells me there is still some room for the Strix to grow. Future products could expand upon them. I certainly hope they do. Because, as written, the Strix are just a little bit restricted. Another problem is, a lot of their feats are really just this slow progression to a fly speed. It's nice to have, don't get me wrong, but I'd like to see some other variety. Still, it's fun to see a classic Paizo ancestry stretching its wings and starting to take flight beyond its normal bounds. So at number 22 on this list, we have the Strix. Hotly protesting their position at number 21 on this list, we have the Kobolds. Now, Kobolds in Pathfinder 2e are a small reptilian ancestry with strong ties to dragons. Ties to dragons so strong that many Kobolds believe the original dragons were created from the Kobolds. Particular mythological interpretation may vary from tribe to tribe. But the reality with the Kobold is, if you like dragon flavor, you're going to love the Kobold, and if you like egomaniacal dragon flavor, this is the ancestry for you. Kobolds have a sense of self-importance that far exceeds their actual stature, and the ego of these little guys would rival the greatest red worms in existence. Combat abilities might not rival as much. Kobolds are masters of tunnel combat and expert snare crafters, cunning, dangerous, and devious in all the right ways, and if you want to play a character with an outsized sense of self, this might be the ancestry for you. Now, all of that being said, I think the issues with the Kobold are a little evident in that Paizo goes really heavy in the weeby dragons aspect of Kobolds. If you love dragon flavor with a side dish of snare crafting, Kobolds are great, but if that's not your jam, this is not going to be the ancestry for you, meaning that ultimately the Kobold ancestry strikes me as very niche, but very fun inside of its niche. So while the Kobolds may complain about their spot on this list, I think they landed a pretty healthy spot at number 21. Next up for number 20, I want to talk about an ancestry that I have some conflicted feelings on. For the most part, I really love this ancestry, though I will admit I ultimately wonder if I would have enjoyed them more if Paizo had gone a slightly different direction. This is an ancestry that I honestly believe didn't need to be an ancestry. I think it would have been better as a versatile heritage, but Paizo chose to make the Fleshwarp into an ancestry that you can play in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Fleshwarp is a catch-all term for an ancestry of those who have been experimented upon and changed through all sorts of magical, alchemical, or otherwise questionable means. And let's just be honest here, if you're playing Fleshwarp, you're going for the body horror aspect of this ancestry. That's the selling point. If you enjoy a good scary movie, the Fleshwarp is probably high on your pick list. I mean, one of my favorite ancestry feats in this entire game is the spew tentacles option that the Fleshwarp ancestry offers you. That's so creepy and so gross, and I love it. Now, one of the things that is impressive about the Fleshwarp is the surprising diversity that you can get out of this particular ancestry. There is surprising mechanical diversity. There are 7 different available heritages and a variety of ancestry feats that you can use to create all sorts of creepy and weird creatures. And there is also narrative and regional diversity inside of the Golarion setting. The Drow are famous flesh crafters, but the nation of Nex also has many flesh-crafted creatures inside of it. You can find flesh-crafted creatures in Ustalov, and in the spell-scarred land of the Mana Wastes, there are probably a few Fleshwarps wandering around as well. The reality is, you have a diverse ancestry that can fit in a lot of different places and a lot of different narratives and work reasonably well. Now, like Undead PCs, some stories may not work as well with a Fleshwarp character, and you might need to talk to your game master to make sure that the character you have in mind is going to fit in the story. But I feel like Paizo has done a pretty good job creating an ancestry that modify itself to fit a lot of different tales. Like, for example, if I wanted to roll up Captain America in Pathfinder 2e, I would actually use Fleshwarp to do it. The mechanics of this ancestry can actually play that way. Now, at the end of the day, I'm still conflicted. I still wonder if Fleshwarp would not have been better off as a versatile heritage, but I have to respect what Paizo has done. I think Fleshwarps are a lot of fun, so they take number 20 on my list. Coming in at a surprising number 19 on my list is an ancestry that I'm sure you're familiar with, humans. Now, in most TTRPGs, humans serve as a sort of baseline or narrative touchstone for a lot of other content inside of a game. Essentially, humans can be a reference point to understand some of the other cool ideas or things that a game might be offering us, and as a result, humans in a lot of RPGs come across as a very vanilla option. Now, to be honest, humans in the Pathfinder game are a little bit vanilla. They only have 3 different heritages, they definitely need more, and while I'm pretty sure they have the most Ancestry feat options in Pathfinder 2e, I will admit most of their best Ancestry feats are 9th level and lower, meaning I feel like humans could use some better high-level Ancestry options. Overall, I feel like you could argue that humans in Pathfinder 2e are what they are for most games: flexible, adaptable, but not particularly exciting in any unique way. But part of this ranking, and what helped pull humans higher up on this list, is the lore and stories surrounding humans, because in the Golarion setting, Paizo has taken humanity and made it very, very interesting. A large portion of the story of Golarion centers around the deity of humanity, Eredin. His death actually triggered the current Age of Lost Omens that is overshadowing the world of Golarion. That in and of itself gives humanity a better narrative tie to what is happening inside of Golarion than I think happens in some other RPGs. Another thing that Paizo does, and honestly they deserve some fantastic credit for, is Paizo is really good at drawing inspiration from real-world cultures without feeling like they are mocking or belittling those cultures or just blandly copy-pasting said cultures. When you look at Tianjia, you see a lot of Oriental influence in the different cultures that occupy that part of the Golarion setting. When you look at Ghoran, again, you see some influence from real-world cultures, but it's not just a blind copy-paste of cultures, but rather an inspiration drawn from what makes each of those cultures unique. When I was in college, I got to interact with a lot of international students and see cultures from all around the world, and I appreciate the design perspectives that Paizo offers because they take a lot of inspiration from a lot of wonderful places and produce very interesting cultures that are fun to play around with. Paizo's take on humanity in the Golarion setting, I think, is very respectful of some of the best that humanity has to offer, and raised humanity from just a bland vanilla option in this RPG to a pretty solid offering. So, humans take number 19 on this list. But now it is time for number 18 on the list, and let's discard all of that wonderful history and culture and set something on fire. That's right, it's time to talk about the Goblins. Honestly, the Goblin ancestry is a personal favorite of mine, and if I wasn't forcing myself to try to be objective, they probably would have been top 5. Goblins are a perfect fit for player characters. You will never convince me otherwise, and Paizo has done such a great job of making goblins into a playable ancestry inside of 2nd edition. One of my favorite combinations, it's actually kind of hard for me not to choose this with a goblin, is the Unbreakable Heritage followed by the Unbreakable Goblin Ancestry feat. That is such a perfect encapsulation of how goblins think and act, and it's so much fun. You have feats like Bouncy, and you can have goblins like taking hits and bouncing all over the battlefield. Like, goblins are just fun. Paizo distilled the chaotic energy of player characters into an ancestry, created goblins, and I love it. Now, what holds goblins back from an objective perspective is the relative lack of lore and story. As far as goblins are concerned, History is like so long ago. That happened like what, last month? I am an entirely new goblin, come on. And that sense of detachment from the larger story I think holds goblins back a little bit. If you're looking for pure, distilled hilarity and fun, goblins are a great choice and they deserve number 18 on this list. Coming in at number 17 on this list, we have the Lich Archetype from Book of the Dead. Now, this is the first Undead PC archetype that we've talked about in this video, so I'm going to be reviewing some of the things I said in the previous video. In Book of the Dead, they give us 6 different archetypes for playing Undead PCs. Now, archetypes are different from Ancestries, so the Lich archetype is technically not an Ancestry choice, but because of the thematic similarities, I wanted to talk about them in this video series. The Undead PC archetypes require you to sacrifice class feats in order to progress and gain some of the Undead PC powers, so they are different from your typical Ancestry. You're not going to be using Ancestry feats to get these abilities, you're going to be giving up class feats instead, and in general that does hold the Undead PC archetypes back a little bit in my estimation. That being said, Lich is now a fair and balanced, reasonable player character option inside of Pathfinder 2e. I have seen stats for Liches in previous games, but this is the first time that I have seen Lich presented in a way where, as a storyteller, I'm like, this could work. Now, Lich is the highest level Undead PC archetype. You cannot hit it before character level 12. And you have to be a pretty heavily dedicated spellcaster to get there. But I do think Lich could make for a good goal for a spellcasting PC, and because you're playing a high-powered spellcaster, I do think that Lich could fit a little bit better in a wider variety of stories than some of the other Undead PC archetypes would, so I do like this overall. Also, since you are becoming a Lich, you've got a natural story goal even before you take your first archetype feat. Overall, I think it's very appealing. You're still definitely not going to be using this in a good aligned campaign, but if you've got a story that's willing to explore some more dangerous places, the Lich archetype could be a lot of fun. That's why it takes number 17. Coming in at number 16 on this list is another ancestry from Battlezoo, and that is the Hardriggan from Jewel of the Indigo Isles. Now, the Hardriggan are a type of ram or goat folk that are known for being very aggressive. They're strong, they're powerful, they believe that submission to a weaker creature is immoral, and they are not afraid to fight for what they want. Hardriggan is the type of ancestry that is more than willing to display its own power and ability in order to get what it's want, and they definitely toe the line with some of the more evil alignments. That being said, even though the Hardriggan was written for the Indigo Isles setting, I honestly feel like they would fit reasonably well in several places inside of Golarion, particularly in and around the Hold of Belskin. Like, I can see the Hardriggan getting along with the Orcs great, and even allying with the Orcs in their battle against the Whispering Tyrant. Now, Hardriggans do that annoying thing that you see with some Ancestries in this game, where they basically say, we don't have any clue what our history is. That's a cop-out, I do not like that kind of writing. But overall, the personality of the Hardriggan is the kind of thing that can easily fit in a lot of places, and Battlezoo does a good job of creating a villainous-esque ancestry that still might have reasons to work with the typical adventuring party. Yes, they can be bullies, but the ancestry is presented in such a way that you can also see them working with a group in order to achieve their goals. And as I have noted in previous videos, I do think that it is good to have ancestries that fill that kind of role inside of a game, because I think it allows for more diverse and interesting character archetypes. Now, if you look into the Hardriggan, expect a very offense-oriented ancestry. They have ram horns, and they are not afraid to hit you with them, and they certainly have a lot of intimidation-oriented and bullying-style tactics that they can employ. They are a little niche in the stories that they could occupy, but ultimately I find them fun and interesting, and the mechanics that they bring to bear are enough to slam their way into number 16 on this list. At number 15, I'm just going to give in and be manipulated by the picture of the cactus Leshy, which we all have to admit is the single most adorable piece of artwork that Paizo has ever published. Try to pretend that's not adorable. You know you can't. Leshies are sentient plant creatures created by druids that are essentially independent as soon as they are created. They don't have a ton of in-world lore. There is a distinguishing line between greater Leshies and lesser Leshies, allowing for both Leshies as player characters, but also Leshies as familiars for characters such as druid players. They have a strong bind to the natural world, and they come with a wide variety of plant-based magic that you can employ through their ancestry feats. One of the things I absolutely love about the Leshy is the ridiculous number of heritages that you have to choose from. Paizo has given us 10 different Leshy heritage options, and then Battlezoo came in and gave us an 11th Leshy option as well, the Wildfire Leshy. Seriously, you've got 11 different options for plant creatures that you can play. All of them are fun, all of them are interesting, and the Leshy is almost as durable as the Ghoran ancestry in most of the potential builds that you can come up with, meaning that this tiny druid-created plant is almost as beefy as the ancient Ash Ghoran fighter that is also in your party. I love Leshies. I think they're a great addition to the game, and the sheer variety that they offer brings them in at number 15. At number 14, we have an ancestry that easily could have been a one-off and forgotten ancestry, and nobody would have minded. That is the Lizardfolk, also known as the Iruxi. Lizardfolk are exactly what you think they are. Giant humanoid lizards that typically serve as monsters, but in some instances can serve as player characters as well. Now, when you first look at the Lizardfolk as a playable ancestry, what you are probably going to notice is the diverse array of natural weapon options that the Lizardfolk can use. They can get claw attacks, they can get bite attacks, they can smack people with their tails. If you want to play someone whose body is a living weapon, the Lizardfolk is an easy choice. However, Paizo has gone the distance and given this ancestry more than just claws and jaws to set them apart. The Iruxi are also associated with two different distinct forms of magic. One is bone magic, and the other is astrology. That's right, the Lizardfolk have two different types of divination magic that they can employ to their advantage, and their ability to call on both the bones and the stars to figure out the best course of action and to take down their foes make Iruxi a surprisingly dangerous foe for many opponents. And a fun fact that I found that I really enjoy, the name Iruxi apparently comes from the draconic word for defiance, adding just a little bit more personality to the Lizardfolk. However, there is something very important about the Lizardfolk that I need to say, and Paizo, I hope you're listening to me. According to official Paizo lore, on the southern portion of the continent of Ghoran, there is a Lizardfolk nation called Droon, where Lizardfolk ride dinosaurs into battle. Paizo, publish a book about this now. Stop making me wait for this. Give me my dinosaur riding Lizardfolk now. I want them. Why are you holding out on me? The only reason Lizardfolk are not higher in this list is I don't have them on top of a T-Rex yet. But for now, they hold a respectable number 14. Next up, we have lucky number 13 on this list. And I might as well pick an ancestry that has a strong tie to fortune and misfortune effects in Pathfinder 2e, so let's talk about the Tengu. Seriously, I didn't plan that. I think it's just cool that they landed at this spot on the list. Tengu are a small-sized birdfolk that are predominantly associated with Tian Sha, but can also be found throughout the Inner Sea region. And they have a strong connection with the sea and sky, with piracy, that's fun, swordplay, and, as already noted, with good and bad luck. In fact, many ships all across Golarion refuse to set sail without a Tengu on board because of the luck that is associated with this particular ancestry. Now, lore-wise, like many of the Tianjia associated ancestries, I do think that there is some room for growth with the Tengu, and I think when the Tianjia books start dropping, we're going to see some growth for the Tengu. But they've still got plenty of places they can fit into games as it stands, and if you're looking for an ancestry that can blend air magic and swordplay and curses all into a single, quite enjoyable package, I think the Tengu is a pretty awesome choice. Now, I will say this, I don't like 2nd edition Tengu art. there's just something about every single picture of a Tengu in 2E that, I don't know, it doesn't sit well with me. But other than that, I really, really enjoy this ancestry. And one of my favorite 17th level feats is the Hurricane Swing option that Tengu characters can take. So, as luck would have it, Tengu are number 13 on my list. I wonder if for number 12 I can make some kind of random connection to the song 12 Days of Christmas. On the 12th day of Christmas, Paizo gave to me the Poppet Ancestry. You know what? I'm leaving that in. I don't care how bad that was. So, the Poppet Ancestry refers to any of a wide variety of doll-like creatures that have been animated, or in this case, awakened to sentience. Now, much like the Leshies that we discussed earlier, there are lesser versions of the Poppet that can be found in and around Golarion that serve as wizard familiars or toys for children, and there are plenty of Poppets that are nothing more than constructs controlled by another creator, but the Poppet Ancestry reflects a creation that has gained enough awareness to act in and of themselves. Poppets can be anything from a child's toy that has been wished alive to a clockwork creation that knows to wind itself up and wander off on adventures. My personal favorite heritage for the Poppet is the Ghost Heritage, where a doll basically absorbs a portion of a person's life force and animates to sentience as a result, meaning you can legitimately play Chucky in Pathfinder 2E now. Why have you done this, Paizo? I love you and am terrified of the results. The heritages and ancestry feats for the Poppets are quite interesting and very diverse. You've got a lot of the upgrade your body style feats that we saw with the automaton earlier. I think those are a lot of fun and allow for some creativity as you sort of describe what your character looks like and how they operate. But one of my favorite things about the Poppets, and something that I think adds a fun depth to their story, is Paizo actually describes a very wide range of reactions to Poppets depending on where you are in the Golarion setting. If you're in Absalom, a Poppet character is likely to be viewed very positively and possibly seen as a servant of a wizard. If you are in Taldor, a Poppet might be a companion and toy for a small child. And if you're in Ustalav, the Poppet is haunted. Run while you still can. Paizo manages to pull some pretty interesting and disparate potential stories from the Poppet, and I think it's a very interesting concept that a lot of players and game masters could have a good time with, so I think it deserves number 12 on this list, the Poppet. Taking a surprisingly strong position on this list and coming in at number 11, we have one of the classic core ancestries for Pathfinder 2E, Dwarves. And at first glance, you may wonder how Dwarves could have built such a strong position for themselves, as much of Paizo's take on Dwarves fits a lot of the classic roles you would expect. Craftsmen, Masters of the Forge. Many Dwarves in the Golarion setting are going to fit the role you would expect from a lot of other fantasy TTRPGs. However, one of the things I like about Paizo is the way they approached the mythology of the Dwarves in the ancient Quest for the Sky. You see, Dwarves started out as a subterranean race, as most fantasy settings would put them, but Paizo gave them an interesting reason to come to the surface in chasing a prophecy known as the Quest for the Sky. Essentially, when Earthfall happened, the Dwarves interpreted that as a divine sign that the time had come for them to find the sky, and they pushed their way to the surface, where they established powerful sky citadels, many of which still stand on the surface of Golarion to this day. Pathfinder Dwarves fill the role you would expect of Dwarves in most games. They are very defense-oriented ancestry, and a lot of their abilities and ancestry feats are going to make your character harder to kill. That's always nice. But one of the things that really pushes Dwarves further than some of the other ancestries on this list is Dwarves actually have a ton of content in Pathfinder 2E. They have the core rulebook, they have the advanced player's guide, they have some of the other books that have offered ancestry content, but one of the things that makes Dwarves interesting is they also got some supplemental content through the book Guns and Gears that talks about Alkenstar, Dungan Hold, one of the Dwarven Sky Citadels, and the Dwarves' role in providing firearms to the Golarion setting. Yes, firearms in a fantasy setting is always a bit of a controversial topic. That's not the point of today's video. Main thing I want to say here is dwarves get a little bit of an extra push because of their role in introducing firearms to the setting, and that gives them a little bit of an extra edge over some of the other ancestries. Some of the Dwarven Sky Citadels still stand, giving you some excellent settings for Dwarven culture, and some of the Dwarven Sky Citadels have fallen, giving you some excellent dungeons for your characters to explore. However, one of my favorite things is just the quest for the sky. That mythological story that once drove the dwarves continues to drive them and continues to shape their culture. In Lost Omen's Moange Expanse, we see a group of dwarves that have an unusual bond to cloud dragons. Cloud dragons. I see what you did there, Paizo. And I know this isn't Pathfinder, but if you go into Starfinder, the quest for the sky actually continues in Dwarven culture all the way up through to Starfinder. They took this mythological story and they didn't just accomplish the goal, but they actually continue to make it relevant to the dwarves and impact their culture and their narrative in a way I find interesting and engaging. Overall, dwarves are just really well represented, they've got some extra oomph, and they take a solid spot on this list, coming in at number 11 overall. Alright, top 10. We're diving into some of the best ancestries available in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and that means we are totally going to talk about an April Fool's prank for number 10. If you are a fan of this channel, you probably already know I absolutely love Battlezoo Ancestries dungeons. For those of you who might not be familiar with this product, on April Fool's Day, April 1st, 2022, Battlezoo Ancestries Dungeons was released as a product allowing you to play a sentient dungeon. Now, when this first hit my email inbox, I thought that Stephen Glicker and his team was just sending out a funny haha April Fool's Day prank, but then I decided to click the link and found a real PDF allowing you to play a sentient dungeon. The storyline behind the dungeon ancestry is that you are a dungeon that somehow gained consciousness and eventually learned the ability to conjure an avatar that you can send out into the world to act on your behalf. You can literally play as a dungeon. By the way, if you want to know the greatest Pathfinder 2e build ever, follow this card. The Dungeon Ancestry takes the best in category wildcard in this entire list because this is the most surprising, best concept for an ancestry I have ever seen in a TTRPG. Don't fight me, I will die on this hill. The Dungeon Ancestry is comedy gold, but it's not just comedy gold. The Battlezoo product produced a real playable character concept, and to this day I still struggle to wrap my head around that. You create an avatar, send it out into the world, and go on adventures as a dungeon. Now, the heritages for the dungeon are admittedly a little plain, and in some cases stretch exactly what a dungeon is supposed to be. Like, you have the classic labyrinth, but you can also have a chain of islands and archipelago as a dungeon. The thematic mileage may vary here, but as I've said many times, Battlezoo's ability to write incredible ancestry feats is on full display with the Dungeon Ancestry, as you gain the ability to conjure things from inside of your own dungeon. You can call a creature to your side as your familiar that once lived inside your dungeon. You can summon traps and place them in the world that once existed inside your dungeon. You can summon entire rooms for your party to camp in from your dungeon. This is thematic gold, and I love every second of it. I occasionally open this PDF up because I just need some more laughs. On top of all of this, the Battlezoo Ancestry Dungeons adds a unique element to their ancestry in the ability to explore your own dungeon as a sort of act of self-discovery. You and your adventuring companions can teleport inside your dungeon and overcome challenges inside your dungeon, granting you as a dungeon more power or more treasure, as a sort of weird metaphor for psychological growth or something. The meta of this commentary is a little too heavy for me, but I'm loving every second of it. Narratively, you're never going to escape the fact that the dungeon Ancestry started out as an April Fool's prank, and it's always going to be a little bit of a silly concept, but I absolutely love the dungeon Ancestry, and I am glad to have it at number 10 on this list. There are a few more Battlezoo options that are going to pop up, including a surprising number 8 on this list, the Orpok Ancestry from Battlezoo. Now, this is an ancestry that comes from Jewel of the Indigo Isles. You can find it in the character creation guide, but the Orpok ancestry is essentially pig folk. Their storyline is that they fled from the destruction of their homeland and had to resettle in the Indigo Isles, at least in the Battlezoo products. However, that storyline is very workable for any setting. You could bring an Orpok settlement and drop it in just about any setting anywhere and have these are refugees from the destruction of their homeland, and that just fits and flows perfectly. The Orpok are described as hardworking homebodies, but it is noted they do have a strong adventurer's tradition, much like the Tooks in Hobbit lore from J.R.R. Tolkien. And also like hobbits, Orpoks are definitely fans of a good meal. Orpoks are notorious for being fantastic chefs. In fact, the vast majority of Orpok ancestry feats, in some fashion or another, are going to reference cooking a meal, eating a meal, brewing a potion. Their ancestry weapon familiarity feat is literally chef's weapons. Stephen Glicker's team found a way to get some serious mileage out of cooking metaphors here. One of my favorite ancestry feats from the Orpok is a 17th level ancestry feat that, for a brief period of time, allows them to avoid death as long as they eat something every round. It doesn't matter what you do to them, there is a window of time where as long as they are eating something, they will survive. That is hilarious to me. I love it. Now, one of the cool things about the Orpok, and something that's a little easy to overlook, is that all Orpok actually begin the game with both low-light vision and scent, making this one of the most perceptive ancestries in Pathfinder 2e. And overall, their hardworking demeanor allows them to be very functional and effective characters. Now, I will say this, of all of the ancestries on the top 10, Orpok is probably one of the easiest ones to overlook. They don't have some of the superlative qualities that you find with some of the other ancestries I'm discussing here, but the overall consistent quality is what really brought the Orpok so high up. This is an ancestry I overlooked on my first couple of readings of Indigo Isle, and when I started researching, I was kind of surprised by how well done this ancestry is, so don't overlook the Orpok. Check them out. They take number 9 on my list. Next up, on number 8, I'm going to appeal to the internet's current love of Brendan Fraser and talk about the Mummy archetype for Pathfinder 2e. This is another Undead PC archetype from Book of the Dead, and it has some of the qualms that I have mentioned with other Undead PC archetypes. Undead PCs are harder to work into all stories. They often only fit in certain stories, and archetypes are not strictly speaking ancestries, so if you want to play a mummy, you're actually going to be sacrificing some class feats to do it. That is still relevant if you're considering the mummy archetype, but that being said, I love this archetype, and one of the reasons I love it is because how well Paizo did in translating the lore of mummies into an interesting set of game mechanics, particularly in the idea that mummies have a bond to the terrain where they were mummified. There is some surprising regional diversity for mummy characters. You expect mummies as an option in places like Geb and the Eye of Dread, but there are other regions around Golarion where mummies are actually perfectly feasible, and an obvious one is Osirian. You can also find them in Mazzali, in Katapesh, and there are even some mummies that exist in and around the realm of the Mammoth Lords. There are a wide variety of regions where mummies can exist, because mummies are a type of undead, at least in Pathfinder lore, that are strongly associated with the land where they were buried, and it is that bond to the terrain that makes mummies such an interesting type of undead PC. Now, there are a number of different mummy-related powers that you can get through archetype feats, and some of them are just hilarious, like ensnaring people with your mummy wrappings, but a lot of the mummy powers allow you to manipulate the terrain around you, and even your basic attacks as a mummy drain the water out of your victims, so you get some pretty cool and thematic abilities. And, more than anything, of all of the undead PC options, Mummy feels like it just hit the sweet spot in terms of balancing the power and flavor of the undead PC. Lich is a high-level archetype that revolves around spellcasters, and Vampire is a grab bag of powers from old Gothic tales, but the Mummy archetype actually feels well balanced to the progression that you would expect a normal character to follow in Pathfinder 2e, and it just consistently feels on point in a way that I really like it. So, at number 8 on my list, the Mummy archetype from Book of the Dead. Next up at number 7, I want to talk about the Sprite heritage, which allows you to play a fairy. Yes, that's right, Paizo gives you the option to play a fairy that inhabits the material plane and goes around on adventures. Now, from a meta perspective, Paizo's lore regarding the First World, the home of the fairies, is, in my mind, much stronger than the Feywild of D&D. Don't get me wrong, I love the Feywild, but I think Paizo has done a better job in their mythology and use of the First World, and I find it a lot more compelling. So the idea that you can play sprites or fairies from the First World, in and of itself, they just start off in a stronger position. From there, the actual sprites that you were playing, the fairies that you were rolling up, they are what's referred to as the wingless children in fairy society. They are heroes born on the material plane who were born without their wings, but with an opportunity to earn their wings by their heroic deeds. The wingless children are seen as possessing great potential, and by traveling out into the world and doing great things, they ultimately hope to hone their magic and earn their wings one day as full fairies. Paizo gives us an impressive 6 heritages, allowing you to play a number of different types of fairies. And then Battlezoo came along and offered a 7th heritage called the Galtsagori, which is a type of crafting-oriented fairy as well. The options for sprites are a lot of the stuff that you would expect. You're going to see a lot of magic, you're going to see a lot of stuff that lets you interact with animals. You can get corgi mounts. And at 17th level, one of the Ancestry feat options is literally called Hero's Wings, representing that you have finally earned the wings that you originally set out to gain. I think that sprites are incredibly well developed and positioned to have some very interesting stories in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, so they take number 7 on my list. Coming in at number 6, I want to talk about an ancestry called the Gnomes. This is a parrotfolk ancestry that is featured in Battlezoo in the Indigo Isles. And I absolutely love the lore that Battlezoo wrote for the Gnomes. In the Indigo Isles setting, the Gnomes originally lived in a glorious age where they were guided by what was called the Great Song. However, demons snuck in and corrupted that song, ultimately corrupting the Gnomes and leading the ancestry down a very dark and terrible path. However, the patron goddess of the Gnomes refused to give up on her followers and ended up creating a new portion of the great song known as the Iris Refrain, and that addition to the song ended up bringing the Gnomes from the terrible precipice that their ancestry had been driven to. Now the Gnomes exist in an interesting state where they still feel the heavy weight of the demonic corruption they once suffered from, but at the same time feel the wonderful influence of the Iris Refrain that is trying to call them back to their old way of life. On top of that, some Gnomes prophets posit a future second refrain that will have an even greater impact on the history of the Gnomes people. Now, obviously this lore is specific to Indigo Isles and uses a lot of the deities and particulars of the Indigo Isles setting, But to be honest, I feel like you could fit that in the Golarion setting like that. Like, honestly, Shelyn versus Demons, congratulations, you've done it. The Gnomes feel like an ancestry that would be very easy to adapt to a typical Pathfinder game with no problems whatsoever, and unlike some of the other Eld-related ancestries in the Indigo Isles, feel like something that a game master is not going to struggle to incorporate, and incorporate well into whatever narrative they're weaving. On top of that, the Gnomes story is interesting. You've got this cosmic conflict between the forces of good and evil that is tearing at the Gnomes soul, and you've got the Gnomes stuck in the middle trying to decide which way they want to go. Mechanically, at first glance, the Gnomes do not have a lot of heritages, they only offer 4, but the game does note that the Gnomes treat the Azamar, Tiefling, and Gonzi heritages as common, meaning that these are functionally normal heritages for the Gnomes, in addition to the base 4 they already have. On top of that, Gnomes come with a really interesting ability that I actually feel is reasonably well balanced, called True Color Sight, allowing them to perceive color in greater detail than most ancestries, and as a side effect of this, allow them to see certain magical effects appearing in the visible light spectrum, such as air magic and force magic, or positive energy and negative energy. That's a cool description and a lot of fun. Their ancestry feats are heavily music related, that should come as no surprise, and feature a ton of sonic attacks, which is a nice touch if you ask me, and they actually have some really impressive 17th level feats, so all around I feel like the Gnomes is a very solid presentation, and I think that Battlezoo did a great job here. Number 6, the Gnomes. At number 5 on this list, I want to talk about an ancestry that really surprised me. Now, I will say, this is an ancestry that I liked and I thought they would do well, but I did not picture them coming in my top 5, and that is the Nagaji from Impossible Lands. Nagaji is a returning ancestry from 1st edition, and I remember them in 1st edition. They were an interesting ancestry at the time, but they didn't really stand out. When it was announced that they were returning to Pathfinder 2e, I was excited to have them back, but I didn't have particularly high hopes for them one way or the other. But if you dive into the Nagaji, Paizo has delivered a surprisingly deep and diverse ancestry that really brings a lot to the table. And I just want to start and say, the Nagaji art in 2nd edition is amazing. Seriously, Paizo upped their art game for this ancestry to the nth degree, and they did really well. And one of the things you will notice in the artwork for the Nagaji is the incredible diversity of forms that Nagaji can take. That's something I actually like about this ancestry. Your character can look a number of different ways and still be part of the same group, culturally speaking. Now, the Nagaji are heavily tied to a nation called Nagajor, which exists in Tianjia, so like some of the other ancestries we've discussed, some of their storyline is still waiting to be developed, and I expect with future products we will see some more from the Nagaji, but overall I still feel like they've got a pretty solid story offering. One of their key personality traits is the concept of devotion, and Nagaji communities are often deeply devoted to a particular deity or to a particular ally or a particular concept, and one of the things I like about the Nagaji as an ancestry is they display some of the same diversity of thought that you would expect of groups like humans. You may remember I talked about how human culture in Golarion is varied and offers a variety of different perspectives. The Nagaji are described the same way, with very different ideas and motives and devotions present from one Nagaji community to another. That's good writing. Mechanically, you have pretty good diversity as well. The heritages are unique and interesting. The ancestry feats for the Nagaji offer some pretty engaging choices. You can go defense-oriented, you can go magic-oriented, you can focus in on poison. Sorry, Vishkanya, you're getting dunked on every which way. And they have several feats that play up the serpent theme of the Nagaji ancestry, but all around you've got several different interesting choices you can make if you decide to play a Nagaji, And in general, I think the Nagaji deserve respect for being such a well-realized example of diversity inside of a single ancestry. This is fantastic writing, and Paizo, I want to see more of this. Coming in at number 4 on this list, and narrowly missing out on the top 3, is the Dragon Ancestry from Battlezoo Ancestries Dragons. By the way, for those of you that watched the Versatile Heritages list, yes, Dragon Scion came in number 4 on that list, and then Dragons came in number 4 on this list. No, I did not plan that. It kind of surprised me when I realized that it happened. But again, I think Battlezoo publishes some incredible content, and I feel like Battlezoo Ancestries Dragons earns the number 4 spot on my list. Narratively speaking, how do you justify playing a dragon? The power scale of a dragon versus a standard character, it's hard to balance. I remember in D&D 3.5 and Pathfinder 1st Edition making 3 different attempts to make dragons as playable characters, and I never quite got the power balance of those characters right. So I have to say, props to Battlezoo, you did good here. Battlezoo's explanation for how dragons can be a playable ancestry is the Lux Aeterna ritual. Essentially, dragons are naturally intensely magical creatures, but the magic that strengthens them plays out very slowly over the course of their life. It's part of the reason that they live so long. However, imagine a dragon that didn't want to wait for that magic to naturally come to it, to flow its normal course. Some dragons might choose to try to redirect or funnel the magic in a way where the benefits of the magic might be more immediate, with some possible consequences to the long-term availability of that magic, and this is where you get Aeternal dragons. Dragons who have performed the Lux Aeterna ritual, sacrificing their long-term potential for more immediate gains. Aeternal dragons don't have quite the raw power that a normal dragon would have, but rather gain the ability to level up in classes just like any other ancestry would. And thus you can have a dragon gunslinger, or a dragon investigator, or a dragon wizard, and you can effectively meld the powers of a dragon with the various classes inside of Pathfinder 2e. Battlezoo went deep building these options. If nothing else can be said, mad respect for the amount of work. When you decide to play an Aeternal dragon, you have 45 different heritage options reflecting everything from your classic black, blue, red dragons, gold, silver, bronze, that kind of thing, down to primal dragons, to imperial dragons, to more esoteric fantasy offerings like toadstool dragons, fairy dragons, or time dragons. There are so many options. It is truly amazing. And if you want to play something like an Azimar dragon or a Gonzi dragon, they actually have a sidebar explaining how you can modify the Versatile Heritage rules, further enhancing the already incredible number of options you have. Wow, Battlezoo, just wow. On top of this, you have a huge amount of dragon ancestry feats that are tiered according to the appropriate ancestry feat levels. And then you also have a couple of archetypes you can use to further enhance your dragon character, the Draconic Ravager archetype and the Draconic Mage archetype. And with the Draconic Ravager, there's actually another option called the Draconic Diehard. But essentially with Ravager, Diehard, or Mage, they are archetypes that allow you to sacrifice some of your class abilities to further enhance your ancestry abilities as a dragon. The options here are astounding, and this is actually probably simultaneously the greatest strength and greatest flaw of dragons as an ancestry. The number of options is so amazing, it's almost overwhelming. I've read as much as I can of Battlezoo Dragons, and I go back and study from time to time, but I have not digested that whole product, and I don't know that I ever will. It feels balanced, but there could be some piece of it that is not, and I might have missed it because of just how much content is inside of it. But at least so far, credit where credit is due, Stephen Glicker, Mark Seifter, and their team has managed to publish dragons as playable characters, give a incredible variety of options, and they work. And here's the cool thing. By making Eternal dragons basically dragons who just did this particular ritual, narratively, you can drop this into Golarion and it works. They don't operate like normal dragons, but they're not supposed to. That's what the ritual is there for. So it doesn't disrupt the narrative of the world too much. I could go on a lot longer, but let's just say it's safe to say Battlezoo Dragons deserves the number 4 spot on this list. So now we're at the top 3. And I'll go ahead and tell you that the farther up this list I've gone, the harder it became to really figure out which ancestries were truly superlative. But one of the most surprising ancestries in this entire process was the Halfling, which are going to come in at number 3 on my list. I knew I liked Pathfinder's take on Halflings, but I didn't realize just how much. Now, to get a little personal here, going back to when I was a child, I remember in elementary school we had a music teacher who every year would come around to our classes and would do some lessons on the period of the U.S. history right before the Civil War. And he would spend a lot of time talking about some of the great abolitionists and talking about some of the people who really fought back against the evils of slavery in the United States. And I remember as a child being both incredibly shocked by the evil of slavery, but also being incredibly inspired by the heroes that stood up to that evil. And I remember as part of those lessons, we would sing a lot of the songs associated with the abolitionist movement, and that is a very potent memory in my mind. Decades later, I still remember sitting around and singing those songs and hearing those stories, and I think part of the reason I love the Halflings so much in Golarion is because they are in part a take on that portion of American history. One of the big parts of Halfling society in Golarion is called the Bellflower Network. It is a group of Halflings who are fighting back against slavery in Golarion, particularly Halfling slavery, and who are standing up to some of the worst evils being inflicted by Cheliax and some of the other villains in the Golarion setting. Now, the Bellflower Network is not a one-to-one underground railroad from American history, but the parallels between the two, you can see Paizo paying homage to some of the greatest heroes of American history, and I really think Paizo did a good job kind of honoring that legacy and crafting interesting stories and character opportunities around the tillers of the Bellflower Network. This may be a personal memory bias that's swinging things for me, but I really think Paizo's take on Halflings is a good way to honor things like that in history and make it interesting inside of a game as well. Now, that is not all that Halflings do in the Golarion setting. I also love the Songo Halflings from the Mwange Expanse and their take on like Zulu stick fighting. I used to watch Zulu stick fighting videos. I always thought those were really exciting as well. So there's a lot of just interesting cultural touchstones that Paizo took for the Halflings and made into some very interesting narrative options inside of the Golarion setting. When I was trying to evaluate Halflings by the different scores for this video, they didn't have anything where Halflings just scored best in category, but consistently across every facet of character design, Halflings are very well done, and the overall strength of the ancestry caused them to climb higher and higher and higher as I was going through. Halflings can play around with luck, fortune, and misfortune like we've talked about with other ancestries. They've got interesting stealth options. They've got a lot of cultural adaptability. And I'm from the southern US, so the Hillock Halfling getting to restore extra HP by eating a snack, let's just admit that's a cultural touchstone for me. But honestly, based on the consistent quality of the Halfling story and options inside of the game, I have to give them number 3 on this list. Next up, we have the penultimate ancestry on this list, number 2, and a very impressive story that belongs to the Orcs inside of Golarion. The Orcs are going to take best in category story and lore, and that is really what propels the Orcs so high up on this list. The Orcs start out in a position similar to a lot of fantasy TTRPGs. You have them as adversaries with the Dwarves for large portions of history, and you even see them playing that typical, like, Horde of Orcs villain role throughout different points of history. At one point, the Orcs largely served in line with the Whispering Tyrant in his crusade to take over Golarion. The Orc ancestry has a lot of that villainous edge that you associate with Orcs, but then Paizo goes and pulls a Warcraft. If you've played the story of Warcraft 3, you know that that story does a good job of changing your perspective on the Orcs and moving them out of a villainous role into a unique place and allowing them to start crafting their own story that is not reliant entirely on an antagonistic role. Paizo has done the same thing here. The Orcs, through their legendary hero Belskin and on up to the present day, have begun forging their own destiny. And in particular, when the Whispering Tyrant showed back up at the start of 2nd edition, the Whispering Tyrant approached the Orcs, expecting them to fall back in line, and they didn't. Right now, the Orcs, under the leadership of a spy master, known as Ardax the White Hare, are actually helping to lead the fight against the Whispering Tyrant and his re-emergent forces. Now, I'll go ahead and say there's also some unique Orc content related to the Mwange Expanse I'm not even touching on here, but that's pretty good stuff too. But I just want to say, in regards to the main Orc storyline in Golarion, that's really good. I like this turn of the Orcs saying, no, we will not be controlled. It fits very much with their personality and with their mindset, and they haven't completely shaken off the villainous edge you might associate with the Orcs, but you also get this sense that they're not just going to bow down before the next evil villain that demands their servitude. It's a fun story beat, and I am excited to see where Paizo takes it. Orcs are described as very stoic and fatalistic, and they're described as being driven by pain and glory. I love some of the Orcish commentary on things like magic and religion. Orcs don't like magic because they consider it a shortcut that bypasses their moral values. Why use magic that's too easy? And when it comes to deities, they view them more as rivals than they do objects of veneration. Orcs have famously said of deities, if it has a name, I can kill it. The drive for glory, the drive for accomplishment, the stoicism, the willingness to fight for what they want, the Orcs have been given a powerful storyline and a powerful personality, and it's a ton of fun. Mechanically, they've also got some good options too. They have the toughest heritage in the entire game. That's an option. And when it comes to ancestry feats, you're going to get natural attacks like a bite attack. You'll get unique beast tamer style options. And there are a lot of options centering around Orcish war masks. They give Orcs a lot of fun content, a lot of unique places to go. And I think overall it is very engaging, extremely well done, top-notch content. One last thing I'll throw out about the Orcs. If you got time, look up the Orcish myth of the Happy Fellow, because it's hilarious. But at the end of the day, one ancestry has to reign supreme. One ancestry has to claim the top spot, and the time has come to reveal which ancestry that is. Now, I will be honest, my top two ancestries actually tied in overall score, and I spent a lot of time wrestling with which one was actually going to take the win. Would it be the Orcs? Or would the cold, angry stare of Regil from Wrath of the Righteous beat me into submission and force me to declare Gnomes as the #1 spot on this list? Yeah, if you had told me 10 years ago that Gnomes would be my favorite ancestry in an RPG, I would have thought you were crazy. I don't feel like Dungeons & Dragons has ever done anything truly interesting with Gnomes. They've been funny, but they've never been compelling. Paizo changed that. Now, allow me to say first and foremost, Paizo has kept a lot of the attributes that people associate with gnomes, and gnomes actually get best in category mechanics 1 for a lot of their heritages. With things like the chameleon, sensate, and vivacious heritage, gnomes are a bright and colorful and amazing ancestry that comes with a wide variety of options. I'm not sure that the Ancestry Versatile Heritage can keep up with gnomes when it comes to diversity of character options. If you're looking for the energy, excitement, and humor that a lot of games associate with gnomes, you will find that with Paizo, but the lore of gnomes is what sets them apart for me from other games. We talked about sprites earlier on this list, and we talked about how Paizo has done a fantastic job making the first world, the home of the fairies, far more engaging than a lot of other game systems. Gnomes are from the first world. In fact, they left the first world. Now, some people say they left on purpose, some people say they were kicked out. There's some disagreements on exactly why, but for one reason or another, gnomes traveled from the first world to the material plane and are now stuck on a plane that is not their natural environment. And this has put gnomes in a peculiar and difficult position as they are used to the ever-changing environment of the first world that is not necessarily mirrored in this one. Here on the first world, gnomes discovered a terrible condition called the bleaching. A gnome thrives on discovery, on change, on excitement, on seeing and hearing and experiencing new things, and a gnome whose life gets too dull runs the risk of having the very color and essence drain out of their body. Their body begins to suffer the bleaching, losing all color until they slowly wither away. Now, as Regil from Wrath of the Righteous has clearly shown us, some gnomes have no problem doing this. But I love the narrative impact of the bleaching and what it means to the decisions that gnomes make. I think it serves as a fantastic driver and character motivator and really sets the gnomes apart from almost any other ancestry in terms of why they do what they do. It's really just absolutely beautiful storytelling, and then on top of that, gnomes have some of the best mechanics to flavor in this entire game. I've already talked about I love a bunch of the gnome heritages, but the gnome feats are almost as good. You expect a lot of the gnome magical stuff, especially the illusion magic stuff. That's not too much of a surprise, but what might be a surprise is the fortuitous shift feat that allows the gnome to, as a reaction, just see if their body isn't there when someone tries to hit them. Or how about the life leap feat, where they touch somebody and then jump over to the other side of them. From first level all the way to Homeward Bound at 17th level, gnomes get some of the best ancestry feats in this entire game, and when I try to build gnomes, I often struggle to pick what I want because there's just so much good stuff here. Narratively and mechanically, the gnomes deliver time and time and time again, and yes, I am terrified of Regil, so at the end of the day, I have to give gnomes number 1. They are my pick for best ancestry in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now please stop scaring me. And with that, we are done. Only like 12 hours of editing work to go. Anyways, that's all I have for you in this series. Through parts 1, 2, and 3 of this series, I have covered every ancestry and versatile heritage that is available for players to choose in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It has been a long journey. There have been a lot of surprises for me. There are definitely a number of ancestries where I was caught off guard by where they fell on this list, and I had a lot of fun doing this, even if it was a ton of work. But the time has finally come to truly turn the whole of this conversation over to you. What do you all think about the ancestries in Pathfinder 2e, and which ancestries do you think deserve to be at the top of the list? Who has the best story? What ancestries gave you the biggest surprise? And what ancestries have the most unique, flavorful, and interesting mechanics? I would love to hear your thoughts on the whole spread of options that Paizo gives us. Now, as a quick heads up, I am going to be taking about a week, maybe 2-week break on this channel after this video goes live. Basically, it's going to be my holiday break for this channel, but don't worry, I will be back very soon with more content talking about some more wonderful stuff in and around Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Please remember to do all of that YouTube stuff, like, share, subscribe, check out Discord and Patreon, and most importantly, jump down to the comments section, be a part of the conversation. But, as always, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Happy New Year, and have a wonderful day.